10 films
Okay.
that have to do with how music, how American black music has affected the masses to the point of where it is. So let me bring this up, and then we'll go through the list here. But this is the list of films, right? So I want you to see the covers so that you can research. So we did a lot of research. So these films right here lock in and tie in to various period. It goes from the 1920s all the way up to 1973 with Wax Stack. So it starts out with the 1920s with Bojangles. And Betsy Smith moves all the way through into the 1970s with Wax Stacks. If you have never seen the Wax Stacks documentary, I'm going to go in reverse. If you have never seen the Wax Stacks documentary, the Wax Stacks documentary details everything. This is 1973. I'm only 2 years old, right? Sorry I missed it, but I wouldn't miss the age that I am right now being in Generation X. Look, it chronicles everything. Richard Pryor is in it. Let me pull up some of the people who are in it. Let me bring this list up. You've seen the cover, so let me bring the list up so that we can read the list to you better. Some of the people who are in Wax Stacks, if you've never seen this documentary. Wax Stacks, 1973, live concert film starring the staple singers Richard Pryor, Carl Thomas, Rufus Thomas, Luther Ingram, Kim Weston, Johnny Taylor, the Bar-Kays, Isaac Hayes, Albert King, and that's not even scratching the surface of the stars that you see, right? But it's the conversation that they have with the people. Remember, the people are always the most important. The people are always the most important. Again, the people are always the most important. It's the conversation they have with the people. They talk about what's happening out in the streets with the police. They talk about the self-love, self-pride. They talk about relationships between black men and black women. Back in 1973, the woman comes up and says, what I don't understand is how a black man will go get any white woman. And why would they want to get any white woman when there's a black woman that can do anything and do it better? Then so the whole conversation, all the conversations that we still talk about today are in this film, and when you look at the other films, starting from back in the 1920s, it's the same conversation all the way to today, which means that, as me and my sister talk about on #ObservationsTFR, in the early shows, we don't speak on it too much anymore because why beat a dead horse? We have to get off the hamster wheel. The hamster wheel is the problem. And how do we get off the hamster wheel? We have to do something different than what we did last time, because obviously they know they can get you with what they did last time, right? Okay. So let's go forward now, because I wanted to start with Wax Stacks to get you to Bojangles, 2001. Gregory Hines, Kimberly Elise. 2 years later, 2003, Gregory Hines would be dead. Who would know that 2 years later, Gregory Hines would be dead? This is the story. It's a bio. It's like a documentary, but instead they show you documentary footage, but they have Kimberly Elise, who is his first wife, portraying his first wife, and Gregory Hines as Mr. Bojangles, Bill Bojangles Robinson. And the issues that they had then are the issues that are discussed then are the same issues that we discuss now. But this ties in, this is very important, to get an understanding, a middle standing, an overstanding of what's going on. That's why we bring this up on Black History Month. We may not be the only show that is dealing with Black history, but we are the only one that is connecting the dots. We are connecting the dots on this show. Now, the next one is an offering from Queen Latifah as Betsy Smith.
Yes.
Now, for those who do not know who Betsy Smith is, shame on you. If you don't know who Betsy Smith is, if you just now, if you thought that Ma Rainey, Black Bottom, was the only woman out there, you just discovered that.
Who's that most deaf?
Who?
Fat Bottom.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Miss Fat Bottom. That's right. That's right. Well, Miss Fat Booty. That's what it is. Miss Fat Booty. But anyway, look. If you thought that Ma Rainey was the only one back in that time that were making race records, you would be wrong. But Betsy Smith was the first $1 million seller of what was called race records to separate black artists away from Caucasian artists. But obviously the Caucasians were buying it, right? And what you find, well, I'll get to that. I'm not going to overstep. We're going to get to that point in some other movies as we put it together. Now, the next thing that you should watch, which is up to watch on Black Reels on YouTube. Black Reels is a station that deals with black entertainment, right? Is the 60th anniversary celebration that was produced and presented live in 1990, celebrating Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh yeah, that was
that's right.
Really nice.
Celebrating Sammy Davis Jr. There's a couple of things. A couple of people who came up there, they just came up there because they were the hot thing. They really didn't know him, like Whitney.
Yeah.
You watching it, and she says, this song really fits you, but you didn't know Sammy. But that's water under the bridge, right? She didn't have as longevity as Sammy. Sammy started when he was 3-4 years old, and he had a great diction, but anyway, we'll keep going.
You think she knew her through her mother?
No, she didn't. Because, her mother was with Elvis. Different story. I'm sure they met in passing because, there's pictures with Elvis and all that. But anyway, besides the point. Everyone who came out for his 60th anniversary, so from the early talkies all the way up through 1990, he was 60 years in the game, and the clips that they show of him and the various people who come out and talk his story give you a context on history, because he was around. He was just being born as Bojangles was popular. He would have known Betsy Smith, known of Betsy Smith, if not have met her as a child. She would have been an adult. He would have been a child, and he would have met her. Now, moving right along, the next one, which is coming out, is the United States versus Billie Holiday. Now, when we get into the 1950s, you find that the rock and roll artists, which was actually rhythm and blues, we're going to get there, are going through the same things that Betsy Smith went through it too, but this is really highlighted in the United States versus Billie Holiday because of a certain song that she would sing because she had enough, right? Starring Andra Day, directed by Lee Daniels, right?
Lee Daniels stated something that I hadn't thought about it, but he's right.
What's that?
That Billie Holiday was one of our early activists.
One of the civil rights leader in music, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. She put it on the line.
Right.
Now, The next piece comes out in 1984. All right, and let me bring this up here. The next piece comes out in 1984, but it deals in Black Hollywood from the 1920s, when there was no talkies, all the way up to that period in 1984, and it is called Black Hollywood, right? 1984, Black Hollywood, right? And in Black Hollywood, it features Paul Mooney, right?
You laugh just thinking about him.
Yeah.
He's hilarious.
It features Paul Mooney, Jim Brown,
Right.
Vanetta McGee,
Right.
DeVale Martin, and more. And they talk about in 84, because of the music video coming out, they said that black people could begin to be outside of Hollywood and start their own business, being independent with their own film companies due to this new thing called video. Right? So they were calling for the independence then, right? They were calling in 1984. So let's move over here. Now, this next one is real dear to my heart because I watched it the other day through a black film festival that they allow, writers and showrunners like ourselves to watch many of the videos, many of the films ahead of time. So this one is dear to my heart. That rhythm, that blues, 1988. It features Charles Brown and Ruth Brown, right? Now, everybody remembers Charles Brown.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, baby.
Yeah. Classic.
You sure did treat me nice.
Yep.
Merry Christmas, baby.
Yep.
You sure did treat me nice. You got me so high, you got me lit up like a Christmas tree. I'm getting ready to change words right here. Old Saint Nick came down the chimney. He took a little bit 3:30. He took a look at me and said, "Nigga, please don't kill me. Merry Christmas, baby. You sure did treat me nice." But anyway, look.
You know what? That took me back because one of the things that I loved growing up about Christmas time is every year on 93 FM, they played all of the Black Christmas songs.
Yes, they sure did.
All of them.
Yeah, they sure did.
All of them. And they played that song like...
Yeah, and Charles Brown.
Christmas.
But what's interesting about this, about this movie, that rhythm, that blues, 1988. First of all, you get to see Charles Brown. This is a person that I only saw his image, his photo, and I heard him sing. I didn't know that Charles Brown lived that long. He lived to 1999.
Wow.
Ruth Brown, who was big in the 1940s. She had her big hit in the 1940s. Then she had her first baby, and it slowed her career down. Well, you have to watch the documentary to get it. But in between featuring them, they discuss how the music industry was, and they speak to different people who were in the industry, like people who are white record labels who went and searched out the people, went back into the sticks of the South where they were hearing the people play, and most of the people didn't care. Also on the film is Ike Turner, right? I mean, it's really interesting how they go back and they talk to these people and they show you what the Chitlin circuit was like, and what happens to Ruth Brown and Charles Brown, which slowed their career down to basically a halt, and then how later they get their second, I'll just call it 15 minutes of fame through people who like their music primarily Caucasians, right? Though black people supported their music, but when they come back out, then they able to go back to their main fan base and rock out with black people. The next after that is Malcolm X.
Okay.
Malcolm X puts you right in that era.
Right.
X puts you right in that era of where Ruth Brown is, right? Where Sammy Davis Jr. is coming through, right? It puts you right in that era. And Malcolm X comes in through the 1950s, through rock and roll into the 1960s. Okay. And as everyone knows, his life story ends in the 1960s, right? But his inspiration
is alive
lived
today.
on, right?
Right.
Now, the next piece is one about Sam Phillips, and it's misnamed, so that's why I put the quotations in there. It's really misnamed, right? It says Sam Phillips, the man who invented rock and roll. It's a 2000 documentary. It's really when Biography Channel first came out. Oh. And did you know that Biography Channel was British at first?
Wow.
It was pumped in from British because the announcer talking was British. And so I'm like, okay, so Biography Channel, most of the biographies were being looked at through the British scope, scope, right? So the film is you have to put in white folks because white folks have the catalog and they had the ability to record. Sam Phillips, he grew up on black gospel music, and he grew up listening to, because he came from Alabama, but he grew up listening to what was happening in anyway, you'll watch the documentary, but he grew up listening to what the blacks were doing, singing, right? The R&B, because that's all it was. Rock and roll was actually R&B. Louis Jordan. R&B, but when you listen to early Louis Jordan with the saxophone is replaced by the guitar. But it's still the same rhythms in the back. And Louis Jordan is actually the father of rock and roll. He's actually the father of rock and roll, right? This guy he opened up a studio where for $3 you could cut one side of an acetate, and for $4 you could cut a second side. And so all these different people were coming through, and so then that gradually opened him up to opening up a record label, which was Sun Records. And you know who Sun Records had? Sun Records later had Elvis Presley. And the man in black, Johnny Cash, right? So he had these people, but before he had those white artists, he had all of the black artists, like what's the? Let me see. Well, let me scan real quick. I don't want to show up the show, but I'm trying to scan for it. Okay. Rufus Thomas. He was on the label. He got his first start on Sun Records. But once he discovered Elvis, a lot of his people who were working with Sam Phillips were looking for the black artist that could cross over to the white audience. Sam Phillips was looking for the black artist that could sing like the black artist that could cross over. So Sam Phillips, in the end, really was not as true to the people who had got him to the certain point, and he just wiped that away and dealt with all black artists. Jerry Lee Lewis comes through, Great Balls of Fire, right? Don't Step on My Blue Suede Shoes. Sam Perkins comes through, and all of the different white artists came through after Elvis, right? So they say he is the one who invented rock and roll. So he can have the term, but everybody knows that it's rhythm and blues, actually. And it's black rhythm and blues. So, I mean, to have context, you have to go. Now, as Goldie Hawn said, when they honored this next man that we're going to show, as like Goldie Hawn said, this man, there was a lot of rock and roll out, but this man wrote the narrative of rock and roll with his songs. Yeah. And that man was Chuck Berry. Yeah. One of my favorite, like, I knew, before I knew Bill Haley and the Comets, before I knew Jerry Lee Lewis, before I even had heard an Elvis Presley record, my parents had Chuck Berry record down in the basement from Live in London, and I would grab it and play it, and it had a song on there called My Ding-a-Ling, right? And it was when he was in London, and he said, once when I was a little boy, my grandma gave me a brand new toy, and every time the bell would ring, I would play with my ding-a-ling, oh my, oh my. And he had the audience, had the girl saying my, and had the fella saying ding-a-ling, and then the English crowd was with it. And so that's when I got, but my favorite, all-time favorite song is Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, but his whole catalog is just jumping. Now, his connection to, right above him, Billie Holiday. He was the black pace setter for all rock and roll. Right. He pace set for all rock and roll. If you wanted to even think that you were up there, you had to get to the level of his writing prowess to tell the story, tell a story in rock and roll. So Chuck Berry was the pace setter, right?
Was he like the architect?
He was the one who wrote the story of rock and roll. Okay. See, there was Sam Phillips through his studio may have got to coin the phrase to make it more commercial to say rock and roll. Right. But Chuck Berry was the man who moved through the white audience as he was telling his narrative, his ability, his penmanship, his pen game. Not penmanship is how you.
I would like to see the Chuck Berry story.
Yeah, that's hell. Well, actually, the Chuck Berry story. You're right, but he's in Cadillac Records.
Is that Mos Def?
That's Mos Def playing him. He's in Cadillac Records, right? Because he was on Chess Records, right? Right. But his ability to his narrative, like, you know, when he talks about Johnny Be Good, and he's talking about he could never read and write so well, but he could play a guitar just like a ringing a bell. Go, go, dun, 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 go, Johnny, go. And he has these hooks, and then the storylines that he tell, his writing goes up against anyone. Right. And supersedes a lot of people who were just saying shake, rattle and roll, everybody shake. And he wrote
nice ballads. The one ballad that you like.
Yeah. He writes nice ballads. Yeah. And so my point, he and Billie Holiday had the same track with the government, because the government thought that just like jazz, so many years before it, they thought that rock and roll was the devil's music, just like they thought that hip hop was the devil's music. And how many black people have went to prison once hip hop became big? Right. How many of the artists have gone to jail? So to try to stymie it, and then they bring out these. Back when Billie Holiday was going, they didn't. Well, yes, they did, because they had Pat Boone. Pat Boone came out and started singing the standards, started singing Little Richard stuff, and you know, the other not Tammy Wynette, but some of the other artists, white artists, would come and cover the black people's songs. Same thing in the 1950s. After they were able to put Chuck Berry in jail, they sent Elvis, who was authentic rock and roll for what he was doing. They sent him to the military. The Big Bopper, Bill Haley, dead in a plane crash. Some of the other artists dead. Then they brought in the teen idols
Okay.
to replace, just like what they do today in hip hop. They bring out these guys to replace. So it's the same thing. So it's always considered the devil's music because it's coming from an American black place. So this particular documentary is called Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. HAIL, like hail, hail, the sheep is here. So Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, and it's celebrating in 1987. It's celebrating when Chuck Berry was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it has a lot of behind the scenes footage.
Yeah, it is. Beautiful scene with him and Etta James.
That's right, Etta James,
Yeah.
and he does this behind the scenes. You can see a lot of it on YouTube too, where he does a medley of 1940s music with his guitar, and I mean he plays these songs, and then he talks about what got him into playing rock and roll, and it came from Boogie Woogie. So I mean it's just, and Boogie Woogie is nothing but another black art form.
Right.
And so and when you hear in his music, you hear the way he plays his guitar. That's actually he's able to play Boogie Woogie while playing the chords of rock and roll, right? Which brings us back to then wax stacks.
Okay.
So these are the 10 definitive that will tie you into what's happening as far as these 10 films, right? Bojangles, Betsy, the 60th celebration of Sammy Davis Jr., the United States versus Billie Holiday, Black Hollywood 1984, That Rhythm, That Blues, X, Sam Phillips, the inventor of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Hail Hail, the actual writer of rock and roll, and wax stacks.
Yes.
This brings you into the 70s, and next week we'll be going and coming into the 80s, right?
When you say wax stacks,
wax, yeah, Watt stacks.
Watt stacks.
Watt stacks.
Oh, no,
Stacks Records.
Is that the? Yeah, when you say that, that makes me think of Isaac Hayes. Wasn't he on that list?
Yeah, he was on Stacks and Watts, but they did this in Watts. It was a commemorative of the Watts riots. It was really to pacify the people.
Okay.
They took the movement and then they pacified it. And sometimes I wonder what Jesse Jackson feels hearing what's going on in this documentary and how none of it came to pass. And the same things that they talk in the Wax Stacks documentary are the same things that they talk, that we're still speaking on today, and we need to get off the hamster wheel and get to solution-based solutions. Action that is solution-based. All right, people. So this is our first Black History Month.
It's a great show. It's a hot show, as you can see.
That's right. So we got, so that was the first 10. I had to break it up.
All right.
And so next week is going to be the next 10 films plus that have to do with coming in from out of the 70s, coming into the 80s, coming into today, right? How our music and the movies and the documentaries that connect the dots. But you start with this will give you a great knowledge of what's happening with black music and how it is the culture, the American culture is black music, American black music.